It's all wrapped up in this enigma of predictive programming, and it leaves us, investigators, researchers, to decipher the science before the conspiracy reveals itself.
Yo, guys, this is Brandon back for another banger of a podcast.
All right, guys, man, we have the beginning of something awesome starting today. And I'm so excited about this show. I'm excited about what we're going to cover for the next few shows. And it's just going to be an amazing, eye-opening experience and event for our audience and even for us. It has been since we've been studying it. And what we're going to dive into is what we're calling the Haunted Canyon. And either one of you guys want to go in to explain what we mean by that?
Well, I mean, we're going to take a deep dive into Laurel Canyon, specifically Southern California, Hollywood area, and take an opportunity to really explore some of the mystique, the mysterious, and maybe see if it's coincidence or conspiracy.
Yeah, we've Lindsy and I have been talking music for years. I mean, that's one of our go-to conversations. And Lindsy, are you excited about diving into all this music stuff that we love so much?
But yeah, the music, but yeah, and just the whole ball of wax there, man. The weird confluence of the occult and intelligence and all of that. I mean, yeah, we're gonna get into that. I'm gonna talk a good bit about Manson and his connection to this area, and yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, isn't it amazing? And I was telling BT offline that this series that we're doing, it has all three of the of the wheelhouses or all three of the things that we have interest in. And first is just the music and the cultural aspect of the countercultural of Laurel Canyon. The second is the government influence that we'll get into later on. The third is the true crime aspect that BT brought up. And, everybody loves a good true crime. Well, Laurel Canyon has had many of true crime. As a matter of fact, I think BT will probably talk more about this, but I mean, it has more bodies per capita in Los Angeles than anywhere else, if I'm right. And, and then the last thing is just the whole occult thing that stems all this together, that brings it back to that place is haunted with sinister forces. You can't look at everything that we've looked at over the past few months doing research on this and not see the sinister forces at work. If you have the eyes to see, like Jesus said, if you have kingdom eyes, you see where the kingdom works, but you also see where the kingdom is not.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's crucial for the spread of the kingdom of God. So one of the reasons we're talking about this is just part of going forward with the kingdom is unveiling and revealing the sinister forces that could be the strong men behind these different areas and stuff. So I'm excited about this, you guys. I'm so excited to dive in. I think that our people out there that listen are going to super duper enjoy this, and they're going to see us three at our best doing deep dive research with a topic, and I'm just excited. Thank you guys for doing this all together.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I'm gonna turn over to BT, and how we're kind of doing this, you guys, is each one of us kind of has taken different areas of the history and the mechanics of Laurel Canyon, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna treat that one as the guest, and the other one's gonna ask questions, but the one is gonna have the primary knowledge of what we're talking about. So we're gonna start first with BT today, going back to the early on part. BT, take it away, and me and Lindsay will interrupt you and ask questions.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great.
Yeah.
So when you guys were talking about launching this Laurel Canyon investigation and research, well, there's a dime a dozen episodes out there, but nobody really seems to cover the beginnings, where all of this seems to have gotten started. And I began to follow that rabbit hole, and it led me actually all the way back to the fall of man, oddly enough. It led me all the way to the first form of propaganda, the first psychological operation performed by the serpent in the garden itself. So we have this idea of propaganda, and that's basically this information that's used to mislead. It's always biased, and it's designed to disseminate and promote a particular viewpoint, ideology, and agenda. And the same could be said about psychological operations. That's the whole entire point. So we have Satan here, typically traditionally considered in the garden, and he's telling Eve, hey, you can eat that and you're not going to die. The problem is you're going to become like gods.
That's like the first psyop, right? Isn't that what you're saying? I
That
mean, the
is
first psyop
exactly
is
what
the,
I'm saying. The first psychological operation performed against man really seems to be right here in this pivotal moment when Eve, I mean, did Eve really just bite into a fruit? Or did she unknowingly take a bite from a tree of some kind of cosmic conspiracy? Did she
I like how you
open
said that.
open her eyes to some kind of forbidden narrative to shape the perspectives that we're going to be exposed to for then on out? And it really seems it left us forever entwined in a web of truth or mystery.
Yeah. Well, and then you spread into the whole seed war over all the years, and it's just it's full of psyops and conspiracies and what's the espionage, so to speak, spycraft.
Yeah.
It's spycraft, even though it's not necessarily governmental spycraft. It's sinister forces.
Sinister forces at play. And then I don't want to belabor the point and drag us all the way through biblical history. So instead, what I'll do is I'll skip forward to where my next favorite rabbit hole led, and that was to Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelley.
Always fascinating, those guys. Just that this level of just occult weirdness and darkness was allowed at a time when people were being kind of burned at the stake for a lot less.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we have these two characters, right? So Dr. John Dee, doctor because he's basically a mathematician, but he was also a court astronomer for Queen Elizabeth I. And that's a really interesting aspect to look at it, because today we know that a lot of the powers that be, the royals, have their own court astrologers. There's no doubt in my mind that a birth or a marriage or any kind of ceremony doesn't take place without intent and some kind of alignment of the stars.
Can I ask you a quick question about that?
Yeah.
Do you think that these rulers and stuff were operating in alchemy and astrology and all this stuff with the intent of satanic worship, or you just think it was part of the cultural thing of the time and it wasn't really seen as backed by sinister forces? What do you think about that, BT?
Well, here's the deal. The royals and the royalty and those who could afford it, so the elite of society, have, since the mystery schools that began in the early centuries BC, have always incorporated some kind of Gnostic or hidden knowledge. And I skipped over a bunch of individuals like the Knights Templar, the formation of the Freemasons on purpose. I didn't want to belabor the point and really draw into, because they're going to come through later on as we're talking. But these people, they practiced and participated and had just as much faith in their occult powers as a Christian who went to church on Sunday, prayed fervently, read the Bible.
Well, and me coming from the Anglican tradition, Elizabeth is really esteemed because she was the one that, quote, forgive me, BT, made it less Catholic. She made more Reformation principles.
Yeah.
Her and King Edward, I think it was King Edward before her.
Right.
And so she's always the champion of the Reformation in the English church, but it's kind of like our founding fathers. You take a deeper dive down the rabbit hole and you see more nefarious stuff other than them just being champions of the faith, particularly in Britain, Great Britain's history. Yeah. So tell us about John Dee and Edward Kelley. Who were they?
Well, according to all reports, Edward Kelley was basically a soothsayer. He portrayed himself as somebody who could scry. And for the listeners, that's basically an individual who could take a seer stone or a glass and look into it to look beyond our realm into the unseen and gain some kind of form of prophecy through the images that they foresee through the mirror or through the crystal. And the crystals will come out later because that's exactly what John Dee and Edward Kelley end up using. And like I said, John Dee was a mathematician. He was an astrologer. He had been arrested for doing astrology for Queen Mary of Scots, actually, and something against the Princess Elizabeth before he became Elizabeth's court astrologer.
Interesting.
And then these two, they get somewhere along the lines, they meet up together and they become this team, and they're given these scrying crystals from some secret society, and they sit to work and they begin doing these rituals, looking into the crystals. Well, specifically Edward. John Dee didn't say he was a scryer, so he never looked into the crystals, but Edward Kelley did, and they began getting messages from what they called angels.
Mm-hmm.
And so
angelic languages, they said.
Yeah, and everything was coming to them. Later on, the term would be called Enochian magic is what they're doing, but that's not what they called it at the time. They called it an angelic language.
Right. Why did they adopt the name Enochian? I mean, I want to clarify that this is not in connection with Enoch, the book, right?
No, that's something else. It comes way later. I do believe the Golden Dawn was probably the first to ascribe it to this system because it wasn't here in the 1600s when they were doing late 1500s, early 1600s when they were doing these scryings. But they started talking to angels, and eventually it became pretty much known to them that they were talking to something maybe not on the good side, because all of a sudden they're given the orders that they need to wife swap.
I didn't know swinging happened back then. That's crazy.
Break out the pineapple there.
Break out the pineapple. That's right.
The angels are like, all right, you guys need to flip the pineapple and exchange wives if you guys are going to continue getting messages from us.
Wow.
And so they do, because they're completely enthralled with whatever they're communicating with. And they eventually transcribe an entire system of language. And the Enochian language is drawn out. It's got its own grammar. The letters, you could look these things up. They basically they're pictographic. Each letter has a sound associated, much like our alphabet does. A doesn't sound like the letter A, or B sounds like an insect B, so on and so forth. And they transcribed this entire language down, and they received all sorts of messages and things that gained them notoriety within the circles of the occult. But the most important aspect that came out of this was Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelley were technically spies, part of the intelligence operation of Queen Elizabeth.
Well, there's a trend there too. I mean, I don't want to go forward too far, but Crowley was a spy too. I mean, there's been a lot of occult secret agent men, so to speak, that are involved in the occult too. That I don't think that's a coincidence. Anyway,
if anybody reads the Ian Fleming novels about James Bond, the 007 gets its start with Dr. John Dee.
Yeah. Oh wow, I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah. Well, see, they start these research and development. This is the whole thing with Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelley. They really began a RAND corporation, a research and development corporation, where they're taking occult principles and trying to scientificify. Yeah, say that word 3 times fast. They're trying to add science to the occult so that you can basically take whatever they're teaching as a math book, basically, and get the same kind of results that they're getting, which is exactly what the Golden Dawn later on would purport, that they were able to use these long rituals and do that. And I'll get into, Aleister Crowley later here, and exactly these rituals are doable. You can take the book, you can do the ritual, and you can receive messages from these, sinister forces, because we know angels aren't going to command you to exchange your wives. Nobody's flipping pineapples in heaven.
Yeah. All right, so we're sitting down, we're laying a foundation. So where do we go next?
Well, the next big jump is research and development in the occult and governments.
And that's the, how do you say it, Rand Corporation?
Yeah, you would call it a
Yeah.
RAND, RAND corporation. And they're all designed in different ways to explore and exploit psychical research, psychic phenomena, be that telekinesis, pyrokinesis was explored for a while. That's the movie Carrie.
Or think Stranger
Carrie.
Things too, right? I mean, this is a Stranger
Mhm.
Things oriented type thing as well, right?
Exactly. That would be the Montauk
Yeah.
experiment. Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. And so the whole intention here is the governments of Great Britain are employing the occult principles laid down by many occultists of the time and secret societies, secret occult groups that the
Right.
elite are part of, and they are researching methodology of the occult to do the things that ancient witchcraft was capable of doing. I mean, imagine being able to craft a circle and pull forth an Elohim just like the witch at Endor.
Mm.
And then it's kind of like it strikes me as like a genie in a bottle. You rub the lamp and it comes out, and your wish is my command. All right, that's what they were expecting.
That's what their
seemed.
desire was. And
Yeah.
it may have looked like that because, of course, today, being moderns, we're able to look back and go, okay, we can clearly see that they're being manipulated by the unseen.
Mhm.
And the whole purpose isn't to further human agenda. The whole purpose is to further the sinister forces agenda, which is to drive us further away from God.
That we were being duped.
Completely.
Yeah,
duped.
it's like, yeah.
Well, and white lab coats somehow made this science, I guess, but it was just the exact same thing that Dee and
Mhm.
Kelley were doing. pretty
It's
much.
exactly what
Yeah,
it
that's
is.
exactly right.
And
Yep.
they're messing with
Yep.
pharmaceuticals. We know that the Greek word is pharmakia, and pharmakia was typically used to open and unlock your mind to see things beyond. DMT, is pretty much quite known for
Hallucinogens.
seeing any hallucinogen.
LSD. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, and I want to make a caveat. Just because you're taking prescription medicine, don't hear what we're saying. We're not saying you're partaking of pharmakia, because I mean, prescription medicine saved my life in my depression. But you need to realize, though, in the whole big pharma business, that occult aspect of pharmakia is everywhere.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is they begin investigating psychical research, and you're like, okay, well, what are we talking about when we're talking about psychical research? Well, these are societies. One specific society, and we're going to just jump here to the 1800s, late 1800s. The Society for Psychical Research starts out in 1882.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And you get these guys, they're kind of big. Charles Macy, Edward Gurney, there's like a Wedgwood. But anyways, these guys are experimenting and playing around with people who can say that they can do these seances. Well, this is the rise of Spiritism. Spiritism is on the rise during this time, and it's kicking off like wildfire in the United States, and it's spreading everywhere. I mean, it's not just in New York and Jersey. It's it's hit California. It's hit the West Coast. And this is where we start looking at places like Los Angeles. Well, until this guy comes along to Los Angeles, Hollywood didn't exist. Therefore, the area for Laurel Canyon hadn't yet existed. But even California with Spiritism, we get this rise of cult groups. And, if you research and you look up, and I did this, and I found like the first cult group that launches in Southern California is this guy named Monet. And he's basically trying to redo Christianity and make it into what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
All these guys are, right?
Pick a number of how many guys have tried to do that over the years. Yep.
But this is what's really interesting. When you start looking at Southern California and you start looking at these cults that are kicking off, never mind the fact that you're going to start seeing a rise in certain technologies. But one of the earliest notable occult groups was started called the Harmony Society. Check this
Tell us
out.
about them.
Yeah, this is started by Father Johann Weishaupt.
Oh, wow.
Weishaupt. I know that name.
We do know that name. Illuminati, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. Adam. When did Adam Weishaupt?
Yeah, Guess what this guy's
Yeah.
middle name is? Adam.
Adam.
Father Johann Adam Weishaupt. He
Father,
starts
like,
this. Yeah.
is he a Catholic priest?
He's a priest of some kind.
Yeah.
It doesn't exactly say where he's at. He might have actually just called himself Father.
Okay.
Because it was pretty common, call yourself bishop, or all these other names are pretty common. But these guys started this utopian community, right?
Now, let me ask you this. Is this the same group that when I was a kid used to be on the side of the road with their flowers, selling flowers? Is this the same group? The Moonies is what we called them?
Oh, the Moonies.
Yeah.
I don't know what the Moonies were doing.
Okay.
Specifically about Monet, he gets married to a Mexican woman, and they constantly have problems with the government because the government's having the same kind of problems at the same time with the Mormons. I mean, there's all these issues. He wants to be a polygamist and all these other things, and so he's driven back to Mexico one too many times. The wife stays. He comes back, and his wife had remarried this French soldier. Yeah, I mean, it's just this long list of, when you start screwing around with the sinister forces, your life begins to show signs of it. And it shows signs of inequity in the second, third, fourth generations, because you look at the daughter of his ex-wife who kills a man who tried to seduce her.
So what was this event? This is in L.A., Los Angeles?
This is in Los Angeles, right?
In what, late 1800s?
No, this is the early 1850s. This
1850s,
this thing kicks off in the 1850s.
Yeah.
But Spiritism is on the rise in the 1840s in the United States. 1840s, that's about 20 years before the Civil War is going to kick off. Okay. But there's quite a bit of things going on. And this idea of cults, these are cults of personality where people are following a very charismatic leader.
Right.
Specifically.
I want to interject something here too. And BT and I've we hadn't debated this, but just talked about this back and forth. I almost see when you have these, what we've kind of coined this term, occult revivals, like the occult revival we're talking about now of the 1840s and 50s. It almost seems like God does another work too at the same time.
Yeah.
Because this is like, I think, when the Second Great Awakening was going on, and Cane Ridge and all these different denominations came together to preach the gospel, and people were getting converted and all this kind of stuff. So, like, we have this occult revival, and then we have this possibly Holy Spirit revival going on at the same time. You think that's a coincidence?
Yeah. Well, the counterculture gave us the Jesus movement too, as dark as it was.
Yep, we'll get to that. Yep, definitely. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I do believe the idea of Spiritism may have been the beginnings of a new occult revival. I don't think that occult revival really took off until the 1880s.
Okay.
But Spiritism paved the way to make it a possibility, because these are just people who are going to new psychics. They're going after people who can read tarot, because tarot's new and popular. Tarot was invented in the late 1700s. And it's just, these things are springing up, and people are interested in the new thing. And you have all these reports of the upper echelon people who, they'll tell the public that they're Christian, and at the same time they're going down to talk to their local psychic.
Yeah. And this is just laying the foundation to where we're going with Laurel Canyon, because this is basically showing the origins of occultism in Los Angeles. Even though there was other occult, these are the big names and the big movers and shakers that are creating what's to come. With Los Angeles, the
Los Angeles,
Angels,
the city of
angels. That's not lost on me at all.
So about like 10 miles north of Los Angeles, specifically, I guess north and east, this guy, his name is H.J. Whitley, and Harvey Henderson Wilcox.
I've heard that name.
Yeah, it was originally started by H.G. Whitley.
Okay.
He wanted this dry town, right? This is way back. I mean, you guys who live in the South know about dry counties. I think some people still have them.
It still do.
My mom grew up in one. Yep.
Yeah. So Los Angeles itself was not a dry town. It was pretty wet. And this guy, he's like, gosh, man, it'd be really nice to have a community where it was dry and people were normal and sane because they see what alcohol does to people. So he starts this community and he calls it Hollywood. And that's a real interesting idea. Why Hollywood?
Yeah.
You know, if we look at the word Hollywood, that's holly from the holly tree, and it's really easy to chase that rabbit and go, okay, holly
Yeah.
is what the
Druidism.
You
Yeah.
got it. That's what they made their
Yeah.
wands out of, was holly trees, right? So you got a guy doing a dry city calling it well. Anyways, Hollywood fails to be its own town because water. You know, Los Angeles has water, but they're not sharing it with anybody. So Hollywood basically dries up, gets incorporated into Los Angeles, and then this other guy comes along, Harvey Henderson Wilcox and his wife, in the late 1800s, start developing it and tying it into a community. And I mean, even to this day, people who live in the Los Angeles, Hollywood area know that there's a symbolic mayor of Hollywood. That's something that you'll never know unless you kind of live in the area.
Interesting. I've never heard that. There is a symbolic mirror.
Yeah.
I mean, can you give us an example? I mean, is it ever known, or is it always secret who the symbolic?
No, it's
mirror
not
is?
secret. It's well known who the mayor of
Okay.
Hollywood. But the thing is, it's all symbology.
Symbolic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's designed to kind of pay homage to the early foundations of Hollywood itself. You know, the late 1800s movies are kicking off in the eastern United States, but one of the biggest things with the movie industry is this guy named Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison owned all the patent rights to how film would be made, recorded, produced. And so people got fed up and sick and tired of the way the people of Thomas Edison would come in and go, okay, you're violating my copyright. Either give me a cut, or they shut it down and destroy the film and destroy everything. These guys are tired of it. So they move to Los Angeles, California. And they knew that if they were as far away from the government as possible, it would take forever because there was no planes, right? There's no fast travel. I mean, everybody was still pretty much getting around on horse and buggy and train. And train made it into California, but it still took forever to get across the United States. And so when they would get wind, because it would come by telegram, they'd get wind that the government was coming, they would just pack everything up and go down to Baja California, Mexico, hang out for a little while until the government people were gone. The G-men were out of there, and then they'd come back up and they'd continue doing film. So it became this Los Angeles, California, and Hollywood became the film industry's underground.
Well, let me ask you this, PT. Do you think it's no coincidence that around the turn of the century, about the same time, there is the basic revival that started the Pentecostal movement on Azusa Street, which is in Los Angeles?
That's really interesting because in the early 1900s, you have Aleister Crowley, who's over in Egypt at the time, receiving a message from some foreign entity while he's in the pyramid at Giza.
Yeah. It's just wild. I mean, people don't, we don't realize this. Hollywood has become such a part of our culture, and it's always portrayed as family and entertainment and all this stuff. And people don't just realize the different layers. And we see the stuff now that the more brazen stars have come up with to push, but that's just supposedly a minority. All the other actors are really wholesome, and we just don't realize that this started way before what we're going to get into later on in Laurel Canyon. So yeah, the countercultural movement.
All of this really begins so early on. I mean, all of the ideas associated with some kind of new culture. I emphasize cult because that's exactly
what they were.
They're designed to begin these new cult ideas. And the 1920s come along, and this is where big time film industry really is kicking off. Edison's old. I think he dies in the 30s. So he's an old man. And I guess about this time, the government's like, you can't be telling these people anymore or whatever. Something's going on with the copyright. So the film industry really kicks off in the 1920s. And
Okay.
and this is Hollywood, right? So Hollywood has all these studios, MGM, and all these places are, Warner Bros. They're all kicking off. I mean, never mind the fact that this, at the same time with actors, they become famous, they become rich.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the other thing that a lot of people miss is Southern California was the bedrock home of mail-in occult lessons. You can say you want to learn something from the Golden Dawn, they got you covered. You want to learn something from the group that Aleister Crowley was a part of, the Order Temple Orientis, you could do that. Freemasons. Never mind the fact that a lot of the founding members of what would become Hollywood's movie industry were all Freemasons. I mean, even Disney
Yeah.
was a Freemason.
Sirhan did a lot of Rosicrucian mail order stuff.
Yeah, the Rosicrucian has a
Bobby Kennedy's
big
assassin.
temple in California. There's all sorts of these things are huge, and all the elite are participating in it. The regular men, the plebes like us,
Right.
couldn't afford these lessons. I mean, it was like 2, 3, 4 days wages just to get one lesson, and nobody was doing that. You were living pretty much hand to mouth at the time. There wasn't a whole lot of money being made by the average person, but the elite needed somewhere to live, and so they developed this area. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, which goes back to prove something that actually the movie The Secret came out with, is the whole premise of it is that the elites knew this knowledge and they were keeping it away from us plebes. And the whole movie supposedly was to get this secret knowledge out to all of us. And so you see that there's some truth to that. The foundation of this was kept in the upper echelons of society for so long. And I just think that backs that up. But anyway, keep going what you're talking about.
Well, okay, so we end up with this. We're in the 1920s. We end up with a couple of cults that are also picking up, because not only do we have these lodges, the Freemasons, we've mentioned the OTO, we've mentioned Rosicrucians, but there was this woman, May Otis Blackburn, starts what's known as the Blackburn cult, also known as the Divine Order of the Royal Arms of the Great 11.
Interesting.
What a mouthful.
Yeah.
I know. It's like, can you name yourself something a little bit small? I guess all the one words like Rosicrucian were already taken, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it's May and her daughter Ruth, and they lead this cult, and they claim that they received divine revelation from heavenly beings. What ends up happening is it leads to a handful of just sadistic, ritualistic abuse, and we would call it satanic ritual abuse today.
That's right.
And that's basically what's going on in the Blackburn cult.
So what were some of the distinctiveness of the Blackburn cult? What were some of the things that they taught that we might recognize today in our modern incarnation of occultic stuff?
Well, they were basically like an unconventional Christian cult.
Oh, okay.
Right. And so it was basically they received divine messages, they operated through numerology. They were a really big apocalyptic cult.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was really popular. I mean, there's a handful of groups out there that were really big in the apocalypse. SDA.
The Adventist stuff was huge from the mid 1800s all the way to where you're talking about now. I mean, most of your cults came out of an Adventist type background. It's really amazing. Yeah.
And then they also practiced or believed in a form of reincarnation.
Interesting. Really interesting.
There's this occult murder that happens in 1926. This guy's name is Marcasio Timon. And we don't really know a whole lot about him and his life. I mean, there's not a whole lot other than police reports and what was recovered from the investigation. He was murdered in Oakland in 1926. Well, Oakland ain't that far away from Los Angeles. Not really.
Nope.
And when the police came to investigate the murder, they found books and manuals of the occult and prayers written in blood. And there was plenty of evidence that it was his own blood And so they don't know what cult he was part of. But clearly there was some kind of bloodletting cult that this guy was involved in Oakland.
Wow.
And so I bring that up, and I bring up Blackburn specifically because we're drawing this line and we're showing that it doesn't appear that there is a coincidence of the occult powers growing in Los Angeles, Hollywood, California.
Right.
There's no coincidence. Something is growing, something is happening, and you can't really seem to put a thumb on it because it's like, well, is it just because it's the West Coast? Well, it's happening everywhere.
We'd like to say that. I mean, and it did spread to Oregon and Washington areas like that. But but no, I think Los Angeles is literally a hub for it. I mean, I really do.
Yeah.
I'd be curious, without chasing this rabbit trail, obviously today in this episode, but how the ley lines fall on Los Angeles.
Oh, that would be a very curious thing to investigate, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it really would. So. But anyway, continue on, my wayward son.
Well, what ends up happening, the movie industry's kicking off, and you got a lot of famous people. And do you know who the earliest famous actor was in Hollywood, California?
Probably one of the Blackmore family. Was it the
Charlie Chaplin? Charlie Chaplin.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I was about to say Douglas Fairbanks, Senior, and start going down all those. But
so if we start to investigate and we look at this guy Charlie, we find out that he was kind of a bit of not a very good guy. I was going to use some deletive expletives there, but he wasn't a very good guy. He had been accused and found guilty several times of getting together with 12-year-old girls. He had an entire cult of personality around him where he would make them marry him and then divorce him. I mean, it was that's ritual,
Yeah.
If you think about it. So there's as famous as he was and as impactful he might have done in his movie career, he was not exactly a really good guy. And it basically is honestly the zeitgeist of the environment, because if he was doing it, you can't say that other Hollywood actors, producers, developers weren't doing the same thing.
Yeah, it's rarely are people doing this stuff alone.
Well, yeah, and it reminds me, and I'm gonna go forward a little bit, but then I'll come back. As we go into Hollywood later on, it's amazing to me when I found out that big stars like Jimmy Stewart and other big actors like that were experimenting with LSD and hallucinogens.
Cary Grant,
Cary Grant, all these actors that you think are good, wholesome, it's a wonderful life, and so anyway, I jumped ahead a little bit, but still, you see that Hollywood has always had an underbelly, and it's only grown. It hasn't receded at all.
That's right.
Anyway.
Well, this is the whole thing. Is remember I was talking about how Edison would come in and be like, "Hey, you guys can't be making these movies," and that just stopped in the 20s.
Yeah.
Well, at the same time, the United States Office of War begins the Bureau of Motion Pictures. Well, here's the deal:
what year was that? Was that right before World War II?
This happens right before World War II, but the thing was, this was beginning in the 20s. The United States government's interest in Hollywood was in the early 20s, and the reason was because Hollywood films were cheap. They were very inexpensive for the plebe to go and watch. People who had money could go see plays. The people who didn't have money could go see movies because you didn't have to pay the actors for each performance. You only had to pay them once. So you can see that there was definitely this idea that plays were elite and movies were for the plebes. And basically the government's collaboration with Tinseltown in the 20s was designed to turn dreams into propaganda, casting illusions on our
No, BT, not America, not the United States.
Not the United States.
That's Russia and Germany and China. They're the propagandists, not the United States.
As the cameras were rolling in the 20s, so were the narratives scripting reality with a touch of sinister forces. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind whatsoever that it was this canvas to give covert influence to design the new truth, the new fiction.
Well, we have to realize we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the sinister force. I'm just going to say that
That's
we
right.
wrestle. They have a plan, and they can even take different disparate people from all over that might think they have a plan, and they can somehow make it work together. You know, I'm not trying to ascribe to them some kind of omniscience or omnipotence or anything like that.
Mhm.
However, their skill and cleverness and all that kind of stuff is enough for them to begin to lay, like you said, the canvas to begin to paint the city of angels.
That's right. And we go on, it's Elmer
Yep.
Davis. He's the head of the Office of War Information,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we talked about the use of propaganda by the intelligence agencies. We spoke about that with Dr. John D. a little while ago. And so the use of, the best word to call it is psychological operation. It's better than propaganda, but that's exactly what it is. It's designed to
Yeah.
mess with your head. And the best
Yeah.
place to do it was where all the people were probably going. And so the 30s come and go. But by the 1940s, more than 90 million Americans are going to the movies. And so if you wanted to
Yeah.
sell them a hat, you wanted to sell them a jacket, you wanted to sell them shoes, you would say, this was seen on this movie. This person wore it as worn by so-and-so actor or actress. In fact, we get an entire dress called the Kitty Foyle dress based on Kitty Foyle.
Hmm.
So basically, they turned hard-earned cash into a ticket to the unknown, where the lines between science and the supernatural become a blur, all funded by government mysticism.
It's programming. I mean, not a coincidence. It's called programming. You know, I mean that they use that intentional word. Not to mention, we'll get into it later. Television. I mean,
Yeah,
the
exactly.
words they use mean things, and we as the quote plebes don't understand the power of words, whereas the elites do. Anyway,
1942 comes. That means that's the Second Great War. World War II breaks out. And there's a lot of movies that are being made. Actors are staying here in the States, being able to get away from having to be part of the war effort. Well, the government gets in there, and any script, any film, anything designed in Hollywood was not allowed to be produced, made, manufactured that said anything to make America, the nation, the idea, the zeitgeist that is America, look unfavorable. Okay. We get a lot of this is where, the 1940s is where we see a lot of the pinup dolls. This is where we get that idea. Movie stars, movie actresses were everywhere, and it was kind of this design for Americans to go, that's the American woman. And, well, there's a song about that.
Yep. Yes, very much.
But that's the whole, this becomes the whole mode of operation. You don't make anything look negative or bad when you're going to war against Germany. Never mind the fact that at the time, many of the large family members of the United States were supporting and paying the war effort to Germany.
Yes.
Mhm.
Well, and what I realized too, sitting here just listening and us talking, is it goes back to our government is saying, "Oh wow, now we have a tool for propaganda." And so we're going to use all this occult stuff to propagandize what we want to see and put out there, all at the same time, not realizing they're being duped by the sinister forces and used at the same time, even though they think the exact opposite, that they're using the sinister forces as their genies to create all this psyops and propaganda, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the greatest lie ever told was convincing people that Satan didn't exist.
Hmm.
Well, that leads us to one of the most peculiar and interesting, maybe even diabolical murders of the 1940s, and that's the death of Elizabeth Short.
Mm.
We know her as the Black Dahlia. And there's a lot to uncover and unpack in this, and we'll keep it family friendly.
Yes.
So who was Elizabeth Short? Well, Elizabeth Short, from what we know, is, well, she died when she was 22. And she came to Southern California when she was 18 years old, maybe even earlier than that. And what we know is she gets wrapped up with this guy, this older man, and it's probably some kind of inappropriate relationship that's going on between this rich guy and so on and so forth. And so what do we know about Elizabeth Short? Well, she came to California and then she left and she went to Florida and she came back to California, all in the brief span of 4 years. This is the part that's really weird and interesting to me. Well, she's found dead in a parking lot, severed in half and drained of blood.
Mm.
I don't really particularly know what to do with that, because that's not normal.
No.
I don't care who you are, what kind of criminological research you've done, but we know that to drain a human of blood, that's like a lot of blood, and to drain them, and none of that blood was found at the crime scene.
Yeah.
Mm.
Like she was dumped at the crime scene. Yeah.
She was dumped where she was at the crime. I mean, it was kind of like a smiley face murder kind of thing, except for this isn't water and she's not a man.
Well, but she does have the smiley face. You need to bring that point out. I mean, she has the cut up her face. It's like a precursor to the smiley face killers. I mean,
it is. Her face is the Heath Ledger. You want to know how I got these scars?
Yes, exactly.
Joker.
Yep.
Yeah.
Joker. Yep.
Well, anyways, it's like we were talking about the occult and the reality of its growth in Southern California and the rise of different kinds of practices. And this is the 1940s. So I'm gonna diverge just a little bit and draw a case file here. We have a guy named Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons is important to Southern California just as much as Elizabeth Short is, because both are victims of their own livelihood, where they were, when they were, and what they were doing. You get wrapped up in the occult world. Sometimes you end up at the end of an explosion or severed in half to fulfill whatever ritual the elites want to perform. But Jack Parsons is a real interesting character, and I find him interesting for a couple of reasons. His first wife is Helen Northrup. And that's a real interesting thing, because we look at Northrup and we know that that is an airplane manufacturer. And they've designed a lot of aircraft designed to look like a wing, a flying wing. And you can look them up. Their most recent, the newest airplane they made was the B-2 Spirit bomber. And obviously, looks like a UFO. And a lot of their wings did. Flying wings were designed to look like UFOs. And I don't think that's a coincidence, especially considering Jack Parsons and his enrapturement with the occult, and specifically Aleister Crowley. These two are known to write to each other. And Jack Parsons meets this other guy, L. Ron Hubbard, another lout of Southern California, the founder of Scientology.
No, yeah, exactly.
Really doesn't require. Well, anyways, Jack Parsons begins this thing. It's called the Parsonage there in Southern California. And it's basically a love cult, love shack. And there's a song about that. And it's designed to, free love, do whatever you want to do, flip that pineapple. That's the whole point of his parsonage cult that he starts.
Sex magic. I mean, that's...
The powers of Aleister Crowley were designed to do sex magic. That was his entire modus of operation. No doubt. Well, Jack Parsons has this dream when he's 13 years old. At 13 years of age, he tries to summon Satan. Call Satan into being based on some kind of ritual manual or something that he found from an occult ritual, probably designed by Aleister Crowley. Anyways, at the same time, there's this woman in Ohio. Her name is Marjorie Cameron. She ends up being his second wife. The wife, Helen Northrup, doesn't last very long, about a couple of years. And this is after L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons perform some Babylon working rituals in the deserts of California. He finds this woman, her name is Marjorie Cameron. They hit it off, fireworks, faster than life, because, they're elites and that's kind of just what they do. There's not a whole lot of romance going on in the story. She's big time into the occult. Well, apparently she's drawn to Parsons because when she was 13 years of age, she had a dream that her backyard garden's gate led to the underworld, was the gates to hell.
That's interesting.
Completely interesting. So anyways, Jack Parsons, he does these rituals. He gets with Marjorie Cameron, and they're together for a little while. There's an accident, kills Jack Parsons, an explosion. He worked with rocket fuels. And he has this, he's in with people like Victor von Braun, the Nazis, and they're all experimenting with rocketry. They're all basically working together, even though you couldn't say they were. Pretty much they were. And Jack Parsons dies in a laboratory explosion. Marjorie Cameron goes on to work in the Department of Defense, and she is employed as a honeypot. And a honeypot's basically a woman they use to get information out of their political rivals. They seduce men and do whatever they need. On an interesting note, there is evidence that Marilyn Monroe was a similar individual because she has a Department of Defense identification.
Not surprising.
But anyways, that's way in the future from where we are now.
Right.
But anyways, this is World War II. And this is we're talking about Laurel Canyon because there ends up being an interesting development in the area. And that is the Air Force begins to establish itself as its own department away from the United States Army. So the Army and the Air Force split, become their own individual branches, and Los Angeles becomes the hub, Inglewood specifically. So the neighborhood of Inglewood is where the base begins, and now it's Los Angeles Air Base, controlled by the Space Force of the United States. So that's the base that gets its rocketry permissions and really begins exploring rockets. Well, this is what's really interesting, is at the same time, the United States government is exploring and experimenting with more psychical research.
Yes.
And once again, remember, the government was involved. The Department of Defense had a massive Bureau of Motion Pictures, and this develops into its own air base. And that's the base called Lookout Mountain,
which is right in the middle of
Laurel Canyon.
Laurel Canyon. Yep.
And we'll talk about Lookout later on. I think, Brandon, you're going to be covering and talking about what it is now. But during this time, during the late 40s into the 50s, Camp Lookout, or Lookout Mountain Air Force Base, is turned into its own movie studio. I mean, this place is basically MGM in the mountain of Laurel Canyon. And this is where they're exploring, experimenting, and developing messages of propaganda designed to make the audience, like I said, if you were a business and you wanted to promote your product and you wanted everybody to buy a Big Mac tomorrow, you would put that in a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And that meant that the government was doing its own thing. You want people to act, behave, respond, interact with the world in a specific way. Well, there was no better way of doing it than making sure the plebes went to watch their newest film.
Well, and I think they also began psychologically to understand this. It's hard for people to really get their minds around this, but they don't realize the whole concept of predictive programming and the fact that once you put something on a big screen in a fictional situation, it instantly cuts in some sort of way in your brain that could possibly be something that's real or something that really exists. And they began to investigate with that predictive programming, which at the same time psychologically in their subconscious sets a foundation for, if it ever comes to exist, they've seen it on TV. So that whole premise of that old psyop of predictive programming, I think they did tons of that in that base on Lookout Mountain. And
Yeah.
I've read the stars that were up there. BT probably has a list of them or a name, several of them, but they're big stars that were called up to this Lookout Mountain movie studio, governmental movie studio, to produce these propaganda pieces.
Yeah, there is a list. I simply didn't grab that. I wanted to cover the bases. One of the major points is the fact that, look, Lindsay, Brandon, this whole thing, this whole design, this whole predictive programming it's basically like people have written a real life episode of the X-Files, right? They're manipulating the masses through subtle hints in popular media. It's as if they're preparing us for events before they unfold. It's a secret language, hidden in plain sight. The truth, it's real. It's out there. It's honest. It's all wrapped up in this enigma of predictive programming. And it leaves us, investigators, researchers, to decipher the signs before the conspiracy reveals itself.
Well, and to also sort through what I'd say the controlled opposition and the distractions and the other rabbit holes that aren't real too. That it's full of that as well. So
ultimately, is it just a coincidence?
Yeah. No.
All of these things kicking off in Los Angeles, California, the Hollywood Hills, Laurel Canyon.
Yep.
Is it conspiracy or is it coincidence?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just thinking, I guess the thing that kind of bothers me about it is just, just going back to that era of the 1940s was movies were like a huge escape for people at a time where you're still in the Depression in the 1940s. It didn't technically end until the post-war era. So people's lives really sucked. They didn't have a lot of money. They could scrape together and go get a movie ticket and watch the movie as many times as they wanted back then.
Yeah.
And it was this time when it was a huge escape. It was a very vulnerable time. It was something that was really special to them, and it was this time that the government was basically screwing people's minds.
Yep, capitalizing on their junk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, back in the 40s, the silver screen was more than just entertainment, right? It was a coded message, no doubt. Films were like cryptic visions, dropping hints about the future. It's as if the architects of a grand conspiracy were scripting reality long before the events unfolded. Or were they predicting the future or manipulating it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes to both. Right. I mean,
yes.
Today we've all seen Simpsons episodes predicting. Were they predicting the future, or were the Simpsons? What's going on there?
Self-fulfilling prophecies.
Well, and like I said earlier, it all comes back to the sinister forces. I want to complain.
Yeah, we want
there are human actors, but you got to remember, we're so arrogant that we think that we can manipulate beings that are eons older than us and 10 times more brilliant than we are. And I'm not trying to glorify them at all, but they're smarter than we are. And we think we can use them. The joke's on us. They had a plan, and this was part of the plan. And I mean, all it takes is just to look at Hollywood and its place in today's American culture. Let's forget American culture. Hollywood in today's world culture.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we can't finish the episode without drawing us back to the beginning, back to those tangled threads at the fall of man, where the sinister forces honestly wove a narrative convincing Eve that she would become like gods. How many other people out there fall for that on the daily? How many? Tens, thousands, millions? I mean, it's this ancient piece of propaganda, this ancient psychological operation that has persisted, and it shapes the destiny, it designs culture, and it makes counter-revolutions occur. It's a shadow cast to conceal the truth. And that truth is our familial relationship as adopted sons and daughters of God.
What we have to realize, and this will get into our next show, is that this whole thing was not an accident.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, sure, different things took advantage of misfortunes or good fortunes or whatever, but this whole thing was intricately planned, and we have to lay that foundation because it was not only planned by the government and these uh, other political entity type things,
Mm-hmm.
but it was also planned by the sinister forces who were manipulating them,
That's right.
and so we just laid the foundation for it, and even connecting Laurel Canyon, because when we get to the next episode, you'll see more how Laurel Canyon, because that's when the experiment started.
That's right.
And we won't go there now because
Yeah,
we
I
don't
only
want to.
drew I only drew us up through the 50s. That was
Yeah.
my goal, was basically to draw us from the dawn of man, the fall of man, all the way up to about the 1950s.
All right. I do have a question though, BT. I want to ask you.
Yeah.
How would you connect the Black Dahlia situation with Laurel Canyon? How did you derive that correlation there?
Well, the key point was to look at a couple of mysterious murders that appeared to have occult tie-ins. It goes with Marcia Timon and his death in Oakland, right? We don't really understand much about Los Angeles because of its size today. It's huge, it's massive. But back
Yeah.
in the 40s, it wasn't that big. People walked everywhere they needed to go unless they had a horse. The thing is cars weren't as big back in those days. I mean, Hollywood actors probably had cars of
The elite.
some
Yeah.
sort,
Yeah.
Mhm.
but not everybody, not Mr. Timon, definitely not uh,
Elizabeth Smart.
Elizabeth.
Right.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
definitely not. I mean, you could fly by airplane. A transatlantic flight was a real thing by the 40s. Thanks to the B-17 and some of those airplanes being turned into, people could fly across the United States. Absolutely. But you didn't just get in a car and drive somewhere. That wasn't a commonality. It wasn't really even common until the 60s and 70s, to be fair. But anyways, I'm looking at these murders and I'm trying to find occult tie-ins. That was my goal. I wanted to
Right.
find the occult tie-ins, or deaths that appeared to have occult ritual murders in Los Angeles during a specific time frame.
Right.
And this is where the Black Dahlia kicks off. She's found in a parking lot, and you can look up there's an FBI investigation that was performed on it. I mean, this wasn't just a simple police investigation.
Never solved. It's never been solved.
We
Yeah.
don't know who killed her.
Yep.
We can watch the 2006 film, The Black Dahlia, and it portrays basically this massive occult ritual. And I wouldn't be surprised that some of that's truth. Most of
Yeah.
it's probably not. But the whole point is the use of murder, the use of blood, and the use of occult ritual has been tied together from the earliest secret societies, the earliest mystery schools, that there's no doubt in my mind that nothing makes magic more powerful than human blood.
Yeah. Yeah. It goes contrary to our understanding of the Eucharist and the communion and the blood of Jesus. So definitely, it's going to have some sort of an occult power. Definitely. That's
Life
why
is in the blood.
sex as well, because it goes back to God's charge of multiplication and to spread the kingdom in the world. So yeah, the sinister forces always seem to go against what God has ordained and
Yeah.
set in order in our world. It seems like in my reading too, I wanted to ask you about this, about the Elizabeth short, that there was
Yeah.
some kind of connection to Laurel Canyon with the Black Dahlia, not other than just the occult murder. There was and I don't remember names. I don't know if you remember the names, but there was somebody that lived there that was possibly a suspect for her murder. Are you
Is
familiar
it
with
maybe
that?
George Hodel? Hodel?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
Dr. George Hodel?
Yeah,
right.
yeah, that's who it was. Yeah, so I wanted to bring that out because that is a connection to the Black Dahlia, and two we'll get into when we get to the next episode. just the dumping of bodies in Laurel Canyon, which became very popular after this period of time.
Yeah, there was Howard. Did we mention Howard Darwin?
No, we
Mm-mm.
didn't. Who is Howard
Yeah,
Darwin?
so right, Howard Darwin, I think, was the guy that Elizabeth was kind of keyed in with, and he lived in this secluded wooded area near Laurel Canyon.
Okay. And when we say Laurel Canyon, you guys, I mean, we're not talking about just Laurel Canyon neighborhood proper. We're talking about just basically that area of the Santa Monica
Santa
Mountains
Monica
because
Mountains.
Yeah.
because a lot of it, some of this stuff took part in Topanga Canyon
Yeah.
as well, and they're all so interrelated. It's the same neighborhood. It's Hollywood, and it's the hills of Hollywood. So keep that in mind when we're talking about this kind of stuff. But yeah, I think we did a good job today. We've laid a foundation of what's to come, and what we're going to talk about next is going to make so much more sense, BT, because of this
Yeah.
foundation that you just laid of the two forces that are trying to control our country and our world. Number one, the sinister forces, and number two, the elite governmental slash secret society forces.
Yeah.
So you laid a foundation for that. Lindsay, anything you want to interject that you're feeling that really jumped out at you?
No, I mean, yeah, I mentioned George Hodel. Yes, yeah, I was a little. There was a series on TNT called "I Am the Night" that was pretty fictionalized, but I think got a lot of the details right, just about him and his possible connection with the Black Dahlia murder. It was, yeah, he
Yeah.
seemed to have been involved with the occult and had kind of these almost sort of eyes wide shut type parties at his
Yeah.
house, and
Yeah.
he
Orgies
was
and
really
stuff.
into the surrealist artists, and yeah,
Yeah. Well, and things haven't changed. I mean, Hollywood is just, if anything, it's gotten worse, it's gotten more debauched, and it's gotten more open. They're not hiding it anymore, and they're doing it in plain sight. And I mean, maybe you can correct me, BT, but I tend to think that when you do it like that, it actually has more power to it. When you're able to disclose what you're doing, and it's a mocking type. I forget the word for it when occultists mock.
Everything designed by the sinister forces is designed to mock God.
Yeah, and so it's having more of an effect. And what's so crazy is you can tell just normal people some of the stuff we're talking about, and they think we're nut jobs. I mean, they think we're absolutely crazy. But to me, it's there. You know, how many things can happen in one neighborhood in Los Angeles
Yeah.
and us not see that it's more than a coincidence? I mean, even statistically, let's just, and I don't have the statistics available to me right now, but just as we get into the series, just the things that have happened in this area,
Yeah.
they're just not statistically possible.
No.
yeah.
Well, everybody, thank you for listening. This show's been a joy for us to put together. We've done a lot of deep research over the past few months to really get this out there to you guys, because we think this is applicable, because it goes back to really doing like a case study of how sinister forces can affect an area, and how they probably affect the area where you live, and how you can better combat that in your life in God and in your church, ranging from spiritual mapping to prayer walking to all that kind of stuff. Research is such an important thing, and there's clues everywhere. And so I'd like to thank my co-host today, BT and Lindsay.
Yep.
Thank you guys for listening, and I can't wait for you to hear the next one. Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.